All right. How's your week's been?
It's been okay. I've been really sick, but I'm feeling better now. So
Mine's been all right,
Hey,
just dealing with family problems. So I've been a little held back from schoolwork, which I'm trying to get back onto.
get back on track.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Jay Golden Kimball, who was he was a general authority in the LDS Church about 120 years ago. And one of the things he said that I really appreciate still, and sometimes I appreciate it more on some days than others, is time is what keeps one damn thing after another from being every damn thing at once. That's pretty good. Yeah, if it wasn't for time, it'd be I think a little bit more difficult to deal with a lot of the junk we've got to have, like family issues and being sick. Did you guys have anything good happen the last week?
not that I can remember.
That's too bad.
It's been a pretty nonchalant week, not gonna lie.
Oh, hey, Emily, glad you could make it. I had a friend once who said that any day you wake up and you're not in jail is a good day. So he must have had a pretty low bar.
Wise words.
Well, today I wanted to go through and I wanted to look over I think we've done the quiz about on volumetric form. I think. Did we go over that quiz? The second quiz? Yeah, about the lines and everything? Yes, we did. Okay. And it looks like to me that even though it looked like everything was um, appropriately dated, it looks like things are jumping on top of each other again. So I've got to go through and clean up the dates a bit. I thought it might be good to go over the next quiz and just to preview it a little bit. But what I wanted to do today mostly is go over the wire and then look at each of the wire assignments that's been turned in. Does that sound pretty good with you guys? And we can also address questions and stuff like that that you have.
Yes, and mine is done. I just have to get the pictures submitted. Well, uploaded and then submitted.
Well, I've graded the assignment where you do the work log, and I've graded the assignment for putting it on the discussion, but I haven't graded any of the wire sculptures because
Okay.
I wanted to look at all the ones that have been turned in and talk about um, what's going on with them in relationship to the parameters of the assignment. And then after that, I think I won't grade those until probably this weekend. So if anybody wants to rework them or touch them up or anything like that, that would be just absolutely fine. One thing I did want to mention about the work logs is one of the things I talked about at the beginning of the term is that each of the projects, I you should expect to spend at least 10 hours on each of the projects. And a few people did the wire project in a very short amount of time. What I have noticed is that there is a direct relationship between uh, the time that somebody spends and how or the grading of the project after it's turned in. And if you don't get the grade that you want on the wire project, go back and spend more time on it. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be all it takes to get the grade up to where you want it to be. So I should say that before we go forward. So I'm not going to grade these until this weekend, I think. And then after, I will, and then we'll talk more about the next project later on. But these projects, I know that even though I thought that I had solved the issue with the dates, it looks to me like things are being stacked on top of each other. If you notice that too, please let me know. I'm going to go through and revamp the dates for the next couple of weeks. Hopefully that will take a little bit of pressure off of some of you. But if it feels to you that things are still too close together after I do that, let me know. And if you feel you're stressed out about trying to get things done, just tell me what's going on, and either I'll move the date back, or you can have the time that you need, whatever it takes. There's been a couple people in the class that have even gotten in car accidents, and this this last week or so, I think 2 people actually got in car accidents. So, and then Samantha, you mentioned you were sick. If stuff like that happens, just let me know. I really don't take off points for stuff being late. You just lose the points if you don't turn it in. And if you haven't turned it in, you see a 0. What's the quickest way to fix that? Anybody?
Turn it in.
Turn it in. Exactly. You turn it in, and I turn around and fix it. It's no longer a 0. There are a couple people too that aren't turning a lot of stuff in. If that's because you are on a trip or anything like that, that's fine. Just let me know. But please be mindful and try really hard not to let this stuff get away from you, because not turning stuff in for a week or two can very quickly turn into not turning in stuff for a month. And that can make it feel like it's almost impossible to get back on track. You can always get back on track, but try really hard not to let it get away from you. All right. Okay, so I am going to, does anybody have any questions about all that I've just talked about? All righty. So I'm going to go ahead, as we go through this quiz, please just let me know what kind of questions you have. On this particular one, this asks where the delineated forms are. Are you familiar with the term delineated forms? I know it does talk about it very specifically in the textbook, but just off the tops of your heads, what are delineated forms?
I can't remember for the life of me. So
I know that linea means line, so is it something to do with the lines?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
delineated?
Yeah, exactly. Delineated means making a line or using a line. And what delineated forms are in sculpture, like in painting, you guys are familiar with Cezanne, right? Or Alberto Giacometti or Minerva Teichert. Have any of you guys heard of any of those painters?
yes.
Okay, one, and Picasso to some extent as well. But what those guys did quite a bit is use the lines that they would paint on the canvas to create their forms. One of the things I love about Minerva Teichert is when she built her paintings, she used translucent layers of oil so you could still see the lines that she had drawn, and sometimes painted over in her paintings, and it makes you feel almost like you're helping her construct the painting. Alberto Giacometti did the same kind of thing, where he would build up the lines as part of the painting, again, so you kind of feel like you're participating and working, sitting next to him while he's doing it. And then Cezanne, of course, would draw lines around his shapes. And of course, all of us love what he does now, or did now, but at the time, people thought it was rather puerile, which I think is they were so wrong. But so that's what they are in paintings, and that's with the line actually. But a lot of the times when somebody does a painting or things like that, what is the element that makes your eye feel that there's a line there? Most of the time, in most paintings. I talked about a couple painters that actually use lines. Most painters kind of avoid them. What is the element that they're using that helps our eyes to see lines where they may not be drawn in?
Is that implied? The implied lines?
Yeah, they're implied lines. They have different fields of color or shade that are, touch each other. And where those two come together, our eye manufactures a line. Our brain sees a line. So on this, when we're talking about transferring that idea to sculpture, just like what Emily said, where are the delineated forms going to be? Shape is, we go into 2D for shape, we go into 3D for form. Where are the outlined shapes going to be in this? There are no drawn lines, so they're all implied. So where are those shapes going to be, those delineated forms?
Probably where the materials touch and continue on.
Yeah. So on this, one of the repeated delineated forms, that's very good, is this right here. You see this kind of, it becomes a rectangle when you're walking around the object, but you have the materials right there that continue on, and the space between them becomes a delineated form. So that's one of them. Another one is going to be these rings on either side, where the rings themselves, because of the material and because of what your eye is doing to try to understand what it sees, even though the circles aren't there, our eyes and our brains perceive them as being there. Does this make sense to you guys? All right, good. So on this, and I really like Adam's, just the little visit with him. He's a fun guy, but I would watch the short video too, and then look at this. What is the difference between this rectangle, this delineated form, and this rectangle here that we see on the floor? The biggest difference is there aren't any drawn lines here. We see the implied lines with our minds, and here the lines are actually in the floor between each of those tiles. This thing is actually like 6 feet tall, something like that. When we talk about the most common rigid materials, we are talking from the beginning of time, ancient times. So looking at this, what are the two materials listed here that you can immediately remove and take those answers out?
Is it plastic and wood?
Plastic is definitely one of them. Plastic has only existed for within the
Oh,
last
is it
century.
plastic and glass?
Yeah, glass has only been used as a medium for last maybe 3,500, 4,000 years, something like that. Our ancestors used stone an awful lot and wood an awful lot. But the answer that says plastic and stone, yeah, they did use stone, but we can't use that. So what's even more common than stone that still lasts is metal. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
And there are several of these we're just going to pass over because you can find them in the reading. Well, one thing I did want to talk about as well is the idea of negative space. Have you folks encountered that term before? Negative space or negative volume? Okay, good. We did talk about it last week when we looked at that video with those two art historians. Could you, by the way, as we were going through that video, could you tell when those two guys were shifting from description to analysis and from analysis to interpretation and from interpretation to value? Could you tell when they were shifting from tool to tool as they were critiquing that? Well, thank you, Samantha. As we are moving forward and talking more and more about construction of form in three-dimensional space, one of the things we need to really be aware of is negative space. And the reason why I was talking about that video is this reminded me of it. This is by Henry Moore, and Henry Moore was the guy who also made the reclining figure in the video we watched. So, you know, he does stuff that on one hand seems really, really weird. And then when you start looking at it, you can recognize, oh, this is a human being. And he is just extrapolating and exaggerating different elements of the human form. And he's not necessarily showing one figure at one moment in time. A lot of the times he may be showing multiple figures. It may be the same person, but he's showing them in multiple perspectives through time, which I think is really interesting. Well, when we talk about negative space, what we are talking about is everywhere the material of the sculpture is not. So the principal material of the sculpture, the subject of the sculpture is going to be this reclining figure form. We have this area here, which kind of aligns in my mind with arms. We have a torso with breasts here. We have what could be a head. We have the rib cage behind this thing right here. Maybe these are hips. And maybe this could be a knee or a calf and some element of a foot type structure. So this is the positive space or positive volume of the sculpture. Through extrapolation, what is going to be the negative space? And when I'm on this sharing thing, I can't always see the screen that shows everybody participating. So if you wouldn't mind just turning on your speaker and commenting. If the white, I'm sorry, you have a comment?
Oh, I just said that. I was gonna say in my comment, I just said I didn't want to interrupt you, but if the sculpture reminds me of like in animation when you have in between frames and it doesn't quite like it's not one pose or another. It's just kind of moving in between them. It feels like he captured that in the sculpture. And for the negative space, I think that it's just in every space underneath and around the forms that he put in there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I love that comment about Henry Moore's stuff too. When I first came into his sculpture, it made me feel kind of sick because it challenged a lot of what I thought I knew about representation. And I think your explanation is really beautiful because his work does feel like he's not just sculpting a form, he's sculpting a form as it exists in time somehow. And there are different elements of that form from different portions of movement or even in between movement. And I like that where he's kind of capturing what's in between frames. I think that's really well done. And you're exactly right about the negative space. So if we look at this sculpture, negative space is going to be this notch right there. And the fact that that notch is missing causes us to look more closely at this area. The negative space is also right underneath here, and that helps us to feel kind of the posturing of this figure, where it feels almost like they're leaning forward or leaning over somehow. And we have an idea of what these forms represent because they almost feel like they're resting on hollow space. And there, I think, was it Samantha, was it you that talked about filled glass last time? Or is that somebody else?
It wasn't me.
Okay. Because one of you were talking about Philip Glass and his 4-minute concerto of silence for the piano. And if I remember the story right, he had gone and visited with a Buddhist monk who taught him that silence is vital because without silence, there'd be no medium for sound to swim in. You know, the silence allows the beats of a drum to exist because the only reason we can recognize the individual beats is because of the silence in between them. And I love that when it comes to silence and sound, but the same is true of negative space and sculptural form. This object would not exist without all the negative space around it. And there wouldn't be a certain amount of tension in this object. We didn't see that negative space like right underneath this form or right underneath these arms that seem to be resting on something. Our eye would not be so immediately attracted to this if the notch wasn't there. Again, this form we wouldn't be invited so quickly to look at it if this notch wasn't in it. And so that negative space becomes the visual silence within which the object can have its life. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, I like the portraits that I see for your guys' images. Like Emily, we have the bright purple hair. For Samantha, we have the big smile. And for Andy, we have 2 letters. These become easy for our eyes to deal with because of the negative space that's involved. So for Andy, we can recognize those letters because the negative space of that cream background helps the letters to stand out. For Samantha, we can see the smile because it stands out in her face. And for Emily, we recognize that swath of hair because that kind of is front and center because it's framed by the negative space behind it, you know, the forms that aren't the hair. And so this is a principle that you guys use all the time in the paintings that you do to help direct and focus people's attention. And again, forced perspective is something that I know that you guys use in your paintings and your 2D work. And this is something what I want you to do is look at this as it speaks in relation to the text with sculpture. Now this one, the grade is not dependent on which one you pick. That has nothing to do with it. The grade is entirely dependent on how you discuss your choice, because each of them activates space in a different way. And the question is, which of the 3 do you feel activates the surrounding space most effectively? And then spend a couple sentences explaining or articulating why you feel that way. This one is really interesting because it seems to be the most static out of all of them, but it activates space in a very different way. And the space that it activates happens to be the social space, which I think is really fascinating. So whatever one you pick does not matter. What matters entirely is how you describe or justify your answer. And wax, throughout history, when lost wax casting has been used to cast metals, wax has always been used as the principal material first to sculpt with. And there's a number of reasons. One reason, well, actually, How about could each of you give a different reason why you think wax would be used to make the initial sculpture as opposed to the metal that's later used to cast? And I don't think you even need to look at the text for this one, but there are several different answers. Emily, what's your first answer?
Oh, it it seems to me that wax would be like the version of sculpting that drawing with a pencil is for 2D artists, where you can erase things and change them easily before
Yeah,
you put it in something permanent.
yeah, exactly. And what you said reminds me of Frank Lloyd Wright, who's one of my favorite architects of all time. He said the eraser is the most valuable um, tool in the studio, and the wrecking bar is the most valuable tool on site. But yeah, you're exactly right. It is the thing that's easy to change, just like the pencil is easy to change. All right, Samantha or Andy, what is one thing that you think about why wax is used instead of metal?
I was
More
gonna
Um,
say it,
sorry, you go on, Samantha.
I was just gonna say it's wax is really easy to manipulate, and so you can create intricate designs and things like that into the wax, and then pour the metal into it, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get the intricacy. Yeah, that is for sure. Which is and the well, I'll say that for just a sec. How about you, Andy? Excellent, Samantha. What was yours, Andy?
I was just gonna add on, like saying that wax is an easy material to manipulate because you can just heat it up and then you can move it, but you'd have to be careful because it's obviously hot. But then once it cools down, it's still easy to deal with. So that's all I was gonna add on.
Well, and it's interesting that you were going to say that because that's exactly what I was going to add on too. That the very reason that wax is used principally, first, is the same reason why we can't depend on it to be permanent, because it is so easily manipulated with heat. I mean, you can heat it up and move it with just the warmth from your hands. I was going to add some of the other reasons might be that wax is a lot less expensive than metal. Wax is a lot easier um, to clarify and work with than metal. There's a lot less expense that goes into preparing the wax to use. But yeah, so and you guys just really quickly came up with three different reasons as to why, and there's others too. It's so yeah, excellent, very good answers, all of you. Now, as plasticity relates to malleability and has nothing to do with actual plastic. Okay, that in fact, plasticity is a much older word than plastic, and that's where plastic gets its name from. So that's clarified in the text as well. Does any of you know what an armature is?
I don't.
Okay, an armature for sculpture is the same kind of thing as the strata you would use, or the stratum you would use for your drawing or your painting. So the armature is like the canvas behind the painting. Uh, if you're working with clay, a lot of the times the clay can't support its own weight unless you have an interior scaffolding to hold it in place, and that's exactly what the armature is. Have any of you seen uh, the original Jurassic Park and Phil Tippett's work with the animation? Have any of you guys seen that? Have you guys seen Paranorman or Kubo and the Two Strings?
Yes.
All right, excellent. That kind of animation requires the object being animated to hold its shape. And it won't be able to do that without sagging unless there's an interior structure to kind of allow the animators to keep it steady between frames so they don't have to touch it. Coraline uses this a lot too. And those interior skeletons to kind of support everything, those are called armatures. And an armature may be as simple as a standpipe when somebody's building like a clay portrait, and it could be as complicated as the articulated dinosaur armatures that were used when they did the pioneering work in animatronic animation for the original Jurassic Park. Scale is really important, and these are three very different sculptures. This is one done by Ron Mueck, and this is an actual human being. So this baby is like 20 feet long. Dwayne Hansen did hyper-real human beings that were actual human sizes. And there were some shows that he did where he put these sculptures in where people thought that they were just hired actors that were really good at staying still. But they're not. They're human-sized, human form that are done photorealistically so they look like real people. And then Slinkachu, all of you are familiar with Slinkachu's work, where he did the little teeny tiny N-scale railroad, figures for N-scale railroads, very tiny scale. Each of these make you feel something very different related directly to the scale before you start even looking at the craftsmanship and realism. And I think, can you guys feel that? When you look at something like this huge, this scale that's very approachable, and then this tiny, tiny thing, do you feel a little bit differently when you look at each of those three? All right, good. And when you get to this part of the quiz, I want you to just write a sentence or two about how each of these different scales. So a sentence or two on this scale, a sentence or two on this scale, and a sentence or two on this scale, and how they make you feel very differently. And then this is another question where you're asked to talk about which is more important, the skeletal structure or the skin. And there isn't a right or wrong answer. Your points come from how well you're able to articulate the justification for your answer. Because you can argue for either way. Either one is good. All right, so that's that quiz. Does that kind of help you to prepare for when you're going through the reading this time, and make you feel a little bit more confident about what you're going to extract from the book? I hope so. Oh, that's funny. I just erased the page we were going to go to next. That's hilarious. Okay. Sigh. So I'm going to share a page again. And I know how boring this can be, so I really appreciate you guys' mental fortitude. Now, as I wanted to just reiterate before we start looking at what people turned in. Oh, I guess before we go on to that, do you guys have any questions or thoughts about what we just talked about in the quiz?
No,
Or do
I'm
you guys
good.
feel okay? You feel pretty confident? Good. Should warn you, I am on the spectrum, and so sometimes I will jump around. It's not because I'm being rude, it's just because I forget that there are social niceties that deal with the transitions from one thing to another. Looking back on the work that you did with the wire, can you see the relationship between the scribble drawings you were asked to do and the wire that you worked on? Okay, Andy says yes. Emily, good, good. And looking at these examples, this is the kind of thing that we're experimenting with. Doing something that activates three-dimensional form, that activates height, width, and depth in space, that activates a volume of space. And each of these objects, to greater or less extent, are able to do that. And so keeping that in mind, I want to go through each of the objects, and I'm trying really hard. I don't want people to know necessarily who did them. I just want to look at each of them. And before we do that, I have a story that I want to share with you. That is, I shared it at the beginning of the semester, and I'm pretty sure I did, but it's a pretty important story that I think I want everybody to keep going back to and referring back to for the rest of the term together. Once upon a time, there was a little bird that flew south way too late, and he ended up almost freezing to death, falling out of the sky and landing in a farmer's field. In this field, as the bird was shivering with cold, knowing he was going to die soon, a cow walks over, looks at him, turns around, and poops on his head. And the bird is absolutely, as you can imagine, is absolutely mortified, completely surrounded by this cow's poop. But it realizes that the poop is warm and has just saved his life. Now, after a while, he's basking in the warmth of this poop that has saved his life. A cat comes over and says, "I notice that you're in this poop. You smell really bad. Would you like me to clean you up?" And the bird says, "Sure, that would be great." So the cat pulls him out of the poop, takes him over to some water, and carefully washes the bird off so that all the poop is gone. And the bird thinks, "Oh, this is wonderful." And then the cat bites off his head and eats him. When I first heard that story, I was 22. It still kind of surprised me. But the moral of the story is, just because somebody poops on you doesn't mean they're your enemy. And just because somebody pulls you out doesn't mean they're your friend. Now, in relation to ideas of artistic critique, thank you, Emily. In relation to ideas of artistic critique, how do you think that story is related to this class?
Just because we're critiquing it doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, exactly. Primarily, just because we're critiquing it doesn't mean it's bad. And I would say also, in addition to that, thank you, Samantha. In addition to that, if we only say pleasing things, if we only tell people, "Oh, that's so pretty," that really doesn't help either. We have to be mindful that the objects that we look at, whether or not we like them, they should be evaluated by ourselves when we look at our own stuff in relationship to the parameters of the assignment. And then the last point is, if I do say things like, "You need to add more here," or "add more there," or "take away that," or "this doesn't really fit," I'm not being a jerk necessarily. I am a lot of the times a jerk, but in that case, I'm not trying to be one. What I'm trying to do is point out that if you want more points, this will bring it closer in line to the parameters and expectations of the assignment. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. So with that in mind, I want to look at each of these objects that have been turned in. And we're going to look at each one. And I would like very much, when we do this and do the screen share, I won't be able to see hands raised. But as we do this, if you have a comment to say for or telling me what was done well and what somebody might need to change, please feel free to do that as well. So this one, it looks to me like this is an elephant. The head of an elephant, and I like that because we can identify it right away. And I'll tell you some of the things that I think are really good is that the individual who made this did a great job emphasizing the tusks and the trunk. And I really kind of like that. That makes, particularly here along the trunk, it's fun, and it kind of mimics to me that visual texture that I expect to see in an elephant's trunk, and I like that. Some of the things that I think would be really cool to see is with the tusks and the trunk having this coil around a supporting wire, just like we saw in the some of the samples from the assignment. It would be kind of cool to see that juxtaposed with maybe some more wire constructing the head on the elephant. I think that would be really cool. Or maybe something lineal on the ear so that it's not just a loop. And if this person ran out of wire and they can't do anymore, I can understand that. But I think for this, it would be really, really interesting to have like the head be made to activate space in a different way visually than the trunks and the tusks, the trunk and the tusks, and maybe something to emphasize the nature of the ear a little bit. Maybe not, but I think that would be really interesting. What do you guys think? By the way, yes, Andy.
I like the fact that you can immediately tell it's an elephant, and I really like the loops on the legs and the trunk. How they're kind of tight, like they're first tight springs, and then
Oh, right here, yeah.
once it gets bigger, it gets loose, and it's really like it's obviously not exactly an elephant, but at first glance you can tell what it's supposed to be, and I really like that.
Yeah, it's I that's a really good point because that kind of calls to mind too that that's how the texture on an elephant's trunk is. You know, you have the fine lines at the tip and then bigger towards as it gets closer to the head. Great comment. I really like this one too. This is super fun. The legs, you know, it's obvious that these feet can stand. It can stand on its own. I like how this person photographed it. They did this, made their own infinity screen with a sheet, and that works really well. I like how the legs are spindly and very different than the body of the bird. I like how you get a feel of scribble space with the way the body is made, and that the head feels very different. And the attitude of this whole object, it feels to me like it's intended to be cartoony and a little bit silly. And I really like that. This person is not trying to make a photorealistic chicken or bird or quail or whatever. What they're doing is combining elements of our kind of symbolic memory of what a bird might look like and putting them together with almost a childlike innocence. And that's really fun for me. What do you guys? Any comments from you guys? What do you guys think? Samantha or Emily?
I think this one's great too because immediately you can tell that it is some type of a bird, and I just love that proportion wise because usually the body is way bigger than the head or the tail. I think it just works great.
Like that's a great comment. Can you tell that this individual has a sense of humor?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's so much fun because these assignments, honestly, these assignments are intended for you to do the assignment, and it's so much fun when all of you put your own kind of attitude into it, and I love seeing that. All right, there's the next one. This looks to me like it is a snake, and there are some things that I really like about this. I like the fact that it's poised. They did a really great job with the infinity screen and sheet behind it as well. That worked out well. And I like how you have the open mouth of the snake, you have the fangs, you have the tongue. That's really very good. The gestural qualities are great. What I would like to see on this is I would like to see something to give the body more of a rounded quality, because this does feel very flat still, even though it does stand up and the head comes out. And I think it would be great to leave all of this in exactly like it is, and then add some of those coils like we saw in the elephant's trunk or the tusk. And I don't think they have to be very much. I think just enough to kind of make us feel that this snake is, has something of a fleshy body. And to leave that wire in there would give such a cool element of visual texture. I think that would be really great. And something maybe a little bit more to kind of flesh out this head a little bit. But what I'm saying, coiling like in the trunk of the elephant, what I'm talking about is like this kind of thing, or like on the tusk right there. Oops, I'm sorry, I went too far ahead. There we go. What are your guys' thoughts? Emily, you're up.
I was gonna say I like they used it looks like different gauges of wire in their sculpture, like the thicker ones on the head and sort of thinner ones for the rest of it. I think that it makes it interesting that there's different varieties of of wire thickness, but I think that the head being like mainly only thick wire makes it feel like a separate kind of entity from the rest of the body. So I would I think it would be improved if they found a way to make it look more cohesive with the rest of the body. Maybe with like what you said, coiling around the body, they could use like the thick wire, and that could make it feel connected to the head.
I think that's a really good point, because yeah, it does. It's obviously all part of the same thing, but it is a very strong departure from the rest of the body. And I think that's a really good point. Because I think I really love how they use, like you said, that smaller gauge wire to develop that texture. And I'm thinking that both of those issues would be solved just by using this gauge of wire and making like loose coils around that structure. I think that's a really good point. Excellent work. This, I don't know if they use different gauges, but what I think is fascinating is that they, on several of these, they coiled, they twisted two strands of wire together. So it feels like a very much a different gauge. But the way that they did that, and some of these strands are individual, some of them are hooked together at the ends. This does feel very much like the flowing tendrils of a jellyfish. That's really interesting. And I like how they coalesce into the central area here, and they kind of make this umbrella cap as well. I think one thing I like about this is that over the years, you can imagine a lot of people have done jellyfish for this assignment, but they've almost always done it where the cap is up, the tendrils are down, or the tentacles are down. And having this person do it like this, where it all rests on the side, makes it feel like this guy is actually actively swimming through water. And I think that's really fun to see. This is not typically what I expect to see, where with those kind of sausage arms like we saw the teddy bear or other things, and it still manages to activate the space around it with having these tendrils in the way they are. And I think that this, where several strands of wire come together open up through here and then come together again. I think that's a really fun solution. And I think this cap does a really good job. I think it's very interesting to me that we have four very distinct ways of constructing through this. And one is 2 wire lines wrapped together. 2 is these kind of loose forms that are held together at opposite ends. 3 is this umbrella-like structure here that's very purposely made. And then 4 is wrapping the wire together in a little ball kind of construction here. I think it's fun to see those different things brought together. What are your guys' thoughts?
I really like that. Like you said, the form is interesting because it's like swimming forward instead of up, like you mentioned. And in doing that, it's a sculpture that could either be presented like sitting on a horizontal surface or being hung up. So I think that was a clever idea of theirs to make it swimming.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a fun way to see it, I think. Now, this structure to me, this reminds me more than anything else. This reminds me an awful lot of Alexander Calder, his work. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is this looks to me, or this makes me think right away of a hermit crab, because I feel that that's what these kinds of things are, like eyes, and then maybe this is the shell. And they've done something similar to this that was treated with the snake, but I think that this is a little bit more successful in activating three-dimensional volume, and I'll explain why. With the snake, we have the flat lines with the wire that was connecting across the flat lines to make texture. The person did the same kind of thing with the coiling wire here and then those flat lines between. But what they did that was different is that they changed the direction of that heavier line so that even though we do have these flat planes, the flat planes have a lot of intersection. And I think that that's kind of a fun way to address that issue. I'm making some gestures with my hands that out of context look really ridiculous. So I hope you guys don't see that on the tiny screen. And the gesture with this is a very small piece, but the gesture with this makes me think of a hermit crab as they're trying to move along. And then these little things right here make me think of a hermit crab's eyes. Does anybody else get those kind of vibes? And what do you think about this piece? Either Samantha.
Yeah, that's exactly what I actually see. I knew it was some type of crab. Hermit crab is perfect because that's what they look like. And I love what she did on the shell just because I think it just adds so much dimension to it.
Yeah, and you see what I'm saying with the like one plane is right here, one plane is here, and then you get 2 other planes going in different directions. Yeah, I like that. That's really fun. Excellent comment. Thank you. Now this one seems to be taking a lot from one of my other favorite artists in this group that we looked at. I don't know if his work was necessarily in the videos that we looked at, but he's a Japanese artist. And right here, this deer eating, this area through here is what makes, I think, Hiroshima, I can't remember his name, but this area through here is what I think of when I see this object. And this looks to me like when I was in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, you haze the new kid by going snipe hunting at night, And this makes me think of that kind of a bird. This is fun for me because it makes me think of that the activity and energy of Anthony Gormley's um, anatomical pieces, his figurative pieces, because you feel the body being developed by just overlapping circles, and you can see that it's not solid. The legs are solid, the beak is solid, but the body and head aren't. But we start to feel like they are. And this person made an infinity screen with the sheet as well. But I think that this is kind of a fun. It's it's a bird in the same way that earlier kind of chicken bird is a bird, and this one makes me think of Dr. Seuss a little bit just because of the line quality. All right, who wants to comment on this one?
I was gonna say I think this is a really unique one for how much uh wire they use, just continually wrapping and wrapping it, and it definitely gives it a different like personality than the more conservative use of wire sculptures. He kind of looks like he's like appearing in a tornado because of the looseness of the body, and then his gaze is like I wouldn't want to meet this bird on the street.
Can you imagine this being on the quad at UVU, a sculpture that's
Oh
like 8
dear.
feet tall? Yeah, it'd be just a little bit intimidating. This size, it's cute. That size, yeah, I would not want to come around a corner and see it with all the lights off, with most of the lights off. That would be startling. Would the artist like to talk about it? All right, I won't put them on the spot. But yeah, I like that comment. This feels very substantial. And even though we can see there's a lot of space in the volume of the head and the body, it's still, because of the solidity of the legs and the beak, it still feels very substantial. Yeah, good comment. This one I think is absolutely fascinating. And on this one, it breaks a lot of the expectations that I have for the wire sculptures that I've seen over the years. This person has taken inspiration from artists like Picasso, and there's a Southeast Asian painter whose work I love, that does work very similar to this, that is really pretty amazing. And I'm sorry, I can't remember their name. But they used heavier wire for a lot of the principal lines. They used a lot of those different planes going in different directions that we talked about. And then they used wire to create elements that are fully 3D, and then also give a lot of visual texture to flatter outlines that they made with the heavier wire. And I think that this is really very fascinating. This is one of the ones that I think would be so much fun to see a time lapse of the process. What are you guys' thoughts on this one? Yes, Andy.
I really like how they use different wires, and I love how they kept the consistency of the black and like the gold. So that way you can tell the difference between the thick wire, so that way you can kind of tell what's going on. And then all the little details and everything is with the thinner wire. And it's really interesting what they decided to create.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It communicates a lot visually, and it's very engaging visually. I would love to see this in a walk around video, because you can see, like, right up here in this area, they used a lot of very strong, like that. They used some of that 3D sausage kind of wrapping, Here, it's very 2D, like we saw in the hermit crab shell on that figure, but the figure itself is on a slightly different plane than I'm gonna guess this is an ox. And then we have here, you have some of that jellyfish stuff going on right through there. You have volume being created with a netting around the belly of the ox. You have some other planes being activated in different directions here. We go down here, we see some of that plane development like you saw on the hermit crab, and then full 3D stuff in the blossom of the lotus here. And then 3D stuff going on here. I think that this is complex because like the jellyfish, it addresses a lot of different textures and a lot of different directionalities. I think that's a really fun one. So yeah, good comment. This is one that I think is, I love the shadow behind it. I think that's fascinating. This is one that I would like to see more development because it is a fun shape that I think needs to be realized a little bit more. And by that, I think that there needs to be more wire to generate this body, torso, and neck and head area. I see that needs to be built up. Like right here with the tail, I think that is really solid and good. But I think that this needs to have more coiling, more detail, like we saw with the snake and then the trunk on the elephant. I think that would really turn that nice, make that developed really nice. And I think that right here for the wings, I would love to see webbing in between here that maybe is curved a little bit and maybe have the wings bent so that they come out and because here they feel a little bit, it feels like these three structures are all on the same plane. And I think with a little bit of webbing, the webbing could be folded out so it feels like it's the air is pushing against it or somehow, or this creature is flexing a little bit. And I think that would really help it as well. And I think that this tail, if it could be added to, it could even be coiled and be strengthened a bit so it becomes the base for the entire structure to rest on. And I love what's going on with the shadow in the photograph. That's really beautifully done. And I think by adding a little bit more like that, they could make this shadow even more interesting. But I think that this is a really good start and it's a fun critter. Yes, Emily.
I agree with your comments that it could be that it's a really good like base to continue building off of. Um, After seeing the previous one and how the little figure had like a little bubble coming out of, I think it was like playing a flute. At least that's my interpretation of the previous one. That this artist could potentially make like a bubble of fire coming out of this dragon's mouth to kind of like make it even more 3D, and that would look really cool in like really thin gauge wire, potentially like in the copper color. But now I'm just kind of designing it in my head. But I think it's a great base that a lot of things could work off of.
Yeah, and I think it's a fun and whimsical shape. That's also, if this thing was 20 feet tall, that would be so frightening. You guys are really, this class has done a great job at creating forms that on one hand are cute when they're small, but if that's a maquette and you blow them up, they're going to be so scary. But Emily, great comments. Excellent. Here's one. This, I think that I really like this shape. The only thing that I think is a negative for this is that it's the paper around it. That's kind of distracting to me right through here. I wonder if there's any
So
way to.
this is mine. And I also didn't realize the problem I had created when I made it so big. Like, this is me touching it. I don't know. It's very big.
Okay, I wonder, is there any way that you could just put a white sheet, have somebody hold up a white sheet
Yeah,
and
I saw
photograph it?
that in some other people's examples, and I was like, I gotta maybe strip my bed because I think my bed has a white sheet on it right now. So that's what I'll probably
Actually,
do.
I'm wondering because the wire is so pale,
It's a
it's silvery and
silver
everything.
wire,
I
yeah.
wonder if you have a gray sheet, that would work a lot better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I was
kind of
gonna say the
thought
same
that
thing. I
too.
think some sort of like a black background would really show.
Make it more.
Yeah,
That's a good
yeah,
idea.
like a gray or a black background, I think would be better. Yeah, definitely.
I'm
But
gonna start
I
doing
think
that right
what
now.
what I love about this is the form, the body is very cleanly built, kind of like that birdcage form that you saw that was in the assignment description page. And I love these lines wrapping around it. So it's not you're not just wrapping it, but you're developing a visual texture that almost develops into stripes. And I think that goes a long way in really giving this body a form. And I like how, yes, the fins are flat, but the way they've been made gives a feeling of movement to it. So even though they are relatively flat, like this, the tail fin curves towards us and away from us, and you can see that and how the wires are put together. Stuff like that is kind of fun. And I like seeing how the wires are used differently right here, and where the body joins the tail and with the eyes. I think there's a lot to this that is really nicely constructed. So anybody who's not Emily, you want to say something about this one?
I just want to say I also really love how you did the fish because it's such an interesting form. Like you can instead of just doing like a regular, almost like an oval shape for the base of the fish, you you can tell where there's like little noses and you can tell like I don't know, it has like a fishy shape almost. Like I don't know how to explain it, but I really love the fins. It has such an interesting detail to it that instead of just being a simple shape, you added a lot of detail to it so that way it keeps the viewer's eyes on it. And like I said, I just love the way you did the wire because it just adds a lot of interesting things to it.
Yeah, I think that turned out well. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, sometimes with photographing, that can be a challenge sometimes because um, you guys aren't required to be a professional photographer when you come into this class. But what I've seen is that when people look at photographing their own work as a way to document their work and present it, that kind of makes us think a little bit differently about not just the stuff that we're doing in class, but I think it can help us to look at our own work differently overall. And I am kind of going onto this side here, and Emily, if you're able to put this in front of a darker background, so we don't see the lines of the paper, stuff like that, that'd be awesome. Um, but the object itself is really good. One and going forward
Yeah.
in this class, I'm sorry, Emily.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I think that is a good idea because it did cross my mind while I was framing it that I think not not a lot of people used the very lightest color wire. I just got that was the cheapest one. But um I think you're right. And photographing is my least favorite part of the artistic process. So this is no different in sculpture for me, but I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. But
Well,
thank you.
and the only reason I talk about that, or the principal reason I talk about that, is I want everybody to respect their own work. You guys put a lot of time and energy into this stuff, and I want you to present your own work the way you want it to be presented. And sometimes, that's why in this class you can always resubmit. If you've lost a couple points because it wasn't photographed well, or because you're still learning, and that's not any aspersion on the individual. It's just an expression of it's not quite there, essentially. Um, and sometimes the only way that comes out is because of how it looks, when you're all finished. Because I don't know about you guys, but in my brain, I can figure out all the problems and everything like that. And I know for sure I've got it licked. And then I do it. And then I start hearing from other people and realize that without the benefit of seeing what I'm thinking inside of my head, they're not getting my vision. And so I've just got to make the adjustments. And I want you guys to recognize that you are fully capable, that you have a lot of talent. And one of the ways for other people to see that is when you um, take pride in showing off your work the way you want other people to see it. Do you all know who Frederick Douglass is or was? Do you guys know who Frederick Douglass is?
I can't say that I do.
His name sounds familiar.
He was an abolitionist. His parents were slaves. The story of his life would make an incredibly exciting movie. He and his wife were able to escape slavery literally by the skin of their teeth. And he traveled all around the world as much as possible at the time, uh, telling people, making people awake to the horrors of slavery in the United States. But for the purposes of this conversation, he was the most photographed American at the time. And he was one of the most widely photographed world celebrities at the time as well. So we're talking 19th century. He met with Abraham Lincoln 3 different times. The first time he thought he was just a ding dong. Second time, he was astonished because Abraham Lincoln was the first politician he talked to that seemed to actually listen. And the third time he met him, he was impressed with the integrity of this individual who he felt was one of the greatest people he'd ever met. And Frederick Douglass was astonished with the miracle of photography, because he said, this is the first time in the history of the world that absolutely anybody can be immortalized and presented to the entirety of the world exactly in the way they desire to be. So think about that for just a moment. He said that photography is a gift that a common person can be presented to the world in a way that used to be reserved only for heads of state. And so there's a big reason why in the 1860s, 1870s, one of the fastest growing cottage industries and small businesses in the northern states was photo studios. And these are photo studios owned by Black American families. And there were a lot of people that took photos and were serious. You see all the people being very serious and frowning stuff in photos. Yeah, they had to hold still for 1 or 2 minutes, but they weren't frowning because they had to hold still for 1 or 2 minutes. You guys can smile for 1 or 2 minutes. If any of you have been to a friend's wedding, as a bridesmaid, best man, best friend, whatever, you can hold a smile for more than 2 minutes. But people were serious because this was a somber occasion. They were making a portrait just like the heads of state in Europe and elsewhere in the world made sat portraits for paintings. And I want you to keep that in mind, that when you photograph your work, like Frederick Douglass says, you have the right, the capacity, and the responsibility to yourself to preserve this work in the way that you want other people to see it. You know how it is in your head. And you know the work that you put into it. And so taking an image of your work for an assignment in this case, or for getting into an exhibit or a show, that's your opportunity to show your own stuff off with the respect that it deserves. And it does deserve respect. You put hours of your life into this work. You deserve to have it recorded with respect. So keep that in mind. And the reason I say that is because, or one of the reasons I say that is people have lost out on the A grade, not because of the quality of their work, but because they insisted on sending photos in where the object was sitting in the corner of a room with a dark wood floor and a white wall, which is incredibly distracting. You can't see half the work. And you saw several of the photographers put sheets up, and that's perfectly acceptable. Now, when Andy photographs this, I'm going to share with the class how much better it looks with a darker sheet behind it. And I would like, if Andy, if you don't mind, when you submit that photo, resubmit with one of your old photos and the new photo so that I can show that in class, because I think that'd be awesome to see. Is that all
Do
right?
you mean Emily?
Oh, is it Emily?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
I
Emily.
believe
Mine was the
Mimi.
big bird.
But
Okay, Emily. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, Andy.
It's all good.
Emily, when you do the fish, uh, yeah, when you resubmit that, resubmit with an old photo and new one, and the new one, so we can see that.
absolutely, I can do that.
Excellent. And that's important too, because when we get on module 6, we're going to be doing conceptual art processes. And that's when the photography is going to be really important. When you do your ready-made, you're going to use the stuff that you taught yourself this semester about photography and the stuff you already know, and do like fashion level shots of your conceptual art ready-made. One of the most successful that I've seen of this is that a person just took an old shoe hanging in their closet. They hung it by one of the shoelaces, and they used a couple of filters, and they set up a couple different lamps so they could get different directional shadows. And with one photo, they made an absolutely beautiful image of a crusty old shoe. And it became really something to see. I'll see if I can find that photo I think it was last fall that they did that, so I can show you what I mean. But they were using the photograph specifically to show this object in a completely new light, and that's great when you can do something like that. All right, Emily or Andy, do you guys have any questions about the material that stuff that we've talked about today?
Not really.
Okay, good. How about you, Emily?
Nope, I
Okay.
am good. I literally like all that you just shared with us. I think I gained some good insights from our conversation.
Great. I appreciate that. I want people to know again, remember, if I'm saying this person should add this, or I think it might be better if it went in this direction or something like that, what I'm doing is just advising you on getting closer to filling the parameters of the lesson. I'm not qualifying you as an artist or your work. So I want people to understand that. By the time you guys have gotten to this class in your career here at UVU, you have already validated yourselves as professional artists. So there's no question about your capacity or your ability. All we're talking about is the work that you present in relation to the parameters of the assignments that we have. And I hope everybody understands that. Do you guys get that, Emily and Andy? Okay, good. Excellent. Good. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to cover today. And I hope you guys don't feel cheated that we're ending a couple minutes early. But I think we did everything we needed to do. We went through we quiz and talked about that. And we looked at each of the assignments that have been turned in. And if you're one of the people that need to put in a little bit of more time or a little bit more work before you resubmit, that's fine. Like I said, I'm not going to grade these until Saturday or so. And I'd like you to go through that. Another thing I would like everybody to be mindful of is as you go through the different module sections and stuff like that, if you feel like the due dates are too close to each other, let me know and I'll change them. Point that out to me, please. Like sometimes I think I fixed them and I haven't. Another thing is too, if you find links that are broken or images that don't upload, please let me know and I'll do the best I can to fix that. About every semester, one of the artist video links that we have stops working. And if you guys let me know, then I can find an alternate and we'll get that going. Yeah, because sometimes artists will revamp their websites or like in the case of Jean-Claude and Christo, they die, which is really sad. And then their foundations do their best to keep the artist websites going, but that doesn't always work. So please be mindful of that and just let me know that links aren't working so I can fix them. But I appreciate you guys coming today, and I look forward to seeing the work through the rest of the semester that you guys are doing. So thank you, folks. Enjoy your week and weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday.
Thank you. Good luck on your speech on Friday.
Oh, thank you. Everybody, but I'm going to put out the poster that we have for the speech on Friday. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be at Provo Library. So
What are you talking about?
I'm recording this, Andy or Emily. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Mistake twice so far. There's going to be three of us. One is Dr. Bybee from the biology department here at UVU. Another one is Danny. We've been friends for years. You'd think I'd know his last name. Danny B. Stewart, who's with the humanities department here at UVU, and me. And we're just going to be talking about the nature and need for cryptids. And we're going to be talking specifically about Bigfoot in Utah and Utah County. So I hope it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
I hope it's going to be a lot of fun. I will send everybody an image of the poster as well. And I'm thinking we'll talk about it next on Wednesday, but I'm thinking I may be happy to give people extra credit if you actually show up and then submit just like a page about your experience. So if that sounds good to everybody, let me know. And if I hear back from at least 4 or 5 people about that specifically by Wednesday, we may make that extra credit for you. All right. Well, thank you, Emily, for being here. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Bye.